Welcome back to the Deep Dive. It is Monday, February 2nd, 2026. Today, we are opening a file that, I think, for most of us, feels like it has been sitting on the desk of American culture for our entire lives.
It really is the endless case.
We are talking about the Menendez brothers, Lyle and Erik. If you were online or watching the news or frankly just breathing air in 2024 and 2025, you probably thought this story was over.
Oh, absolutely.
There was this massive cultural wave, documentaries, the dramatizations on Netflix, Kim Kardashian getting involved. It felt like a done deal. They were coming home.
It felt inevitable. The momentum was unlike anything we've seen in the criminal justice space in decades. You had public sentiment shifting, the district attorney's office pivoting. It looked like the final chapter was being written.
And yet here we are. It's February 2026. The welcome home banners have been taken down. Lyle and Erik Menendez are still waking up every morning in a cell at the Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility.
Still there.
So my question, and the question we need to answer today, is simply, what happened? How do you go from almost free to denied in the span of just a few months?
And to answer that, we can't just look at the parole hearing from last August. We have to look at the whole picture. I mean, the entire timeline.
So what are we working with today?
For today's deep dive, I've brought in the full stack. I've got the original 1989 police reports, the psychological evaluations from Dr. Ozio, which are just fascinating.
I can imagine.
And then the transcripts from both the 1993 and the 1996 trials, and critically, the actual text of the parole board's decision from August 2025.
Okay, so our mission is to connect the dots. We want to understand not just the crime, but the legal machinery that has kept them in, let them almost out, and then slam the door shut again.
That is the goal. We need to parse the difference between a resentencing, which they won, and parole, which they lost. Those are two very different legal beasts.
And to do that, we have to start at the beginning.
We have to. Before the TikToks, before the Netflix shows, we have to go back to that house in Beverly Hills.
Let's start with the image, because I think people forget before they were the Menendez brothers killers, they were the Menendez family, the American dream.
On paper, you could not script a better success story. It centers on the father, José Menendez. And I think to understand the boys, you have to understand the sheer force of will that was José.
He was an immigrant, right? From Cuba.
He was. He came from Cuba at age 15, right after the revolution. His family lost everything. So he lands in the U.S., a teenager with nothing. And he climbs.
That's incredible.
He gets a scholarship to Southern Illinois University. He meets Kitty there, Mary Louise Anderson. They marry in '63. He grinds his way through an accounting degree at Queens College.
But he didn't stay an accountant for long?
No way. His rise was meteoric. He was aggressive, charming, and ruthless in business. He moves to Hertz, then RCA Records. By the time they get to California, he's the CEO of Live Entertainment.
Live Entertainment, that was a big deal on the home video market, wasn't it?
A huge deal. Think Dirty Dancing, think Rambo. He was the guy who could make or break careers in the entertainment industry. He was synonymous with power.
And with that power came wealth.
Extreme wealth. They moved from New York to New Jersey, where the boys went to Princeton Day School, which is very elite, then to Calabasas, and finally to 722 North Elm Drive in Beverly Hills.
The famous house.
The famous house. A Mediterranean-style mansion, tennis court, pool, the works. It was the absolute pinnacle of the 1980s aesthetic of success.
In Kitty, the mother. Where did she fit into this picture of power and ambition?
She was the homemaker, but the sources paint a really complicated picture. She was a former teacher, won beauty pageants in her youth. But as José's career skyrocketed and the pressure mounted, she struggled.
In what way?
The sources from the trial from both sides highlight heavy drinking, depression, and a weird shifting dynamic with her sons. She was described as sometimes suffocatingly close and other times completely detached, almost neglectful.
With a very unstable presence.
Very, and that instability, coupled with José's rigid perfectionism, created this pressure cooker environment.
Let's talk about the sons then, Lyle and Erik, because the prosecution's narrative was always spoiled brats. And looking at the early sources, there's some truth to that, isn't there?
There were definitely behavioral issues that money was covering up, or at least trying to. Take Lyle, the older one. Born in '68, he gets into Princeton University.
Which is a golden ticket. Your dad's dream for you.
It is, but he treats it like a playground. He was placed on academic probation almost immediately. Then he gets suspended for plagiarism.
Plagiarism, wow.
But it's the dorm life notes that are really interesting. He lived in Goss Hall. He was reportedly a nightmare to live with.
How so?
There are reports of him just throwing his roommate's stuff into the hall because he decided he didn't want to share the space. He was overflowing sinks, causing water damage. He essentially acted like rules didn't apply to him.
That sounds like deep entitlement. I'm a Menendez. I do what I want.
Precisely. It wasn't just college kid pranks. It was a fundamental disregard for other people's existence.
Okay, so that's Lyle. What about Erik?
Erik, 2 years younger, born in 1970. He's at Beverly Hills High. He's not the academic star like Lyle was supposed to be, but he's a tennis prodigy.
I remember that. He was nationally ranked, wasn't he?
He was. Ranked 44th in the U.S. for his age group. He was being groomed for a professional career. That was his path.
But there's something else in your notes here about a screenplay he wrote. This detail always gives me chills.
This is one of those details that feels like it's straight out of a movie. In high school, Erik co-wrote a screenplay called Friends with a Classmate, Craig Signorelli.
Okay, teenage boys write scripts. What was it about?
The plot was about a wealthy young man who murders his parents to inherit their fortune, and he plans and commits the perfect crime.
Wait, you're telling me he literally wrote the script for what he was going to do?
It's almost too on the nose, isn't it? The prosecution certainly thought so later. It suggests that the idea of parenticide for profit was at least a fantasy in his head long before the night in question.
A fantasy that was about to get a lot more real.
And it wasn't just fantasy. In 1988, a year before the murders, the brothers went on a burglary spree.
Burglary? They lived in a mansion. What were they stealing?
The thrill, mostly. But they stole over $100,000 in cash and jewelry from their neighbors' houses in Calabasas.
That's not a prank. That's grand larceny. That's serious felony territory.
It is. And this is actually why the family moved to Beverly Hills. It was a geographical cure. José smoothed it over legally. Money makes problems disappear. But the tension in that house was nuclear.
So you have a father who demands perfection, a mother who is fraying at the edges, and 2 sons who are committing felonies for fun.
The pressure cooker is hissing. Which brings us to August 1989.
The week of the murders. But didn't just happen that night. There was planning involved.
A lot of planning. And this is what destroys the idea that they just snapped in a moment of passion. On Friday, August 18th, 2 days before, Lyle and Erik tried to buy handguns.
Handguns.
But they got flagged. California has a waiting period, and there was an issue with Lyle's license, so they couldn't get them.
If they had gotten handguns, do you think the crime scene would have looked different?
Completely different. Handguns are surgical. You point, you shoot, it's relatively contained. But because they were denied, they went to Plan B.
Which was?
They drove down to San Diego to a Big Five sporting goods store. Lyle used a stolen ID belonging to a friend, Donovan Goodrow.
So now we have premeditation and use of a stolen ID.
And they bought 2 Mossberg 12-gauge shotguns.
See, I'm not a gun expert, but I know that a 12-gauge shotgun is not a precision instrument. That is a weapon designed for massive damage.
It's a weapon of obliteration. And that speaks to the psychology of the killing, the rage involved. So they have the guns. Sunday night, August 20th. José and Kitty are in the den. They are eating ice cream, vanilla, and berries, and watching a movie.
Do we know what movie it was?
The Spy Who Loved Me, a James Bond film.
It's so mundane.
Yeah.
Just a wealthy couple winding down their weekend.
Until the door opens. Lyle and Erik enter, carrying the loaded shotguns. They didn't say a word, they just opened fire.
I've read the autopsy reports in your stack here. They are difficult to read. They are brutal.
They are horrific. This wasn't just shooting. José was hit 6 times. The first shot blew out his elbow. The second hit him in the back. The fatal shot was to the back of the head, and at that range, with a shotgun. The medical examiner described decapitation and evisceration.
Oh my God.
It was overkill in the extreme.
And Kitty.
This is the part that really hurts the self-defense argument later on. Kitty was shot. She was wounded. She was on the floor, crawling away, trying to escape. And Lyle ran out of ammunition.
So he stopped.
No. He ran out to their car, reloaded the shotgun, walked back into the house, and fired the final fatal shot into her face while she was helpless on the floor.
That reload moment, that's the pivot point, isn't it? Legally speaking.
It's everything. In the eyes of the law, that pause running to the car, fumbling with shells, loading the chamber, that is time to think. That is time to choose. It takes it from a panicked reaction to a deliberate execution.
So the deed is done. The house is a slaughterhouse. What do they do next? Do they run?
No, they go into scriptwriter mode. They meticulously collect the shell casings, though they missed a few, which were found later. They take the guns and their bloody clothes and drive up to Mulholland Drive and dump them in a canyon.
And then the alibi.
Then they need an alibi. Their first idea was flawed. They bought tickets to see Tim Burton's Batman.
Right, I remember this detail.
But they realized the timestamps on the tickets wouldn't line up with the coroner's estimated time of death. They were thinking clearly enough to realize that their alibi had a hole in it.
Which is pretty cold and calculated.
Extremely. So instead, they went to the Taste of LA festival at the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium.
Just walking around eating appetizers after executing their parents.
It suggests a profound level of dissociation, or sociopathy, depending on which expert you ask. They return home later that night, discover the bodies, and Lyle makes the call.
The 911 call. Someone killed my parents.
It's hysterical. He's screaming, sobbing. To this day, people debate it. Was that the performance of a lifetime? Or was that the reality crashing down on a 21-year-old who just blew his father's head off?
And the police at the scene, they bought it.
Hook, line, and sinker. They walked into that room, saw the carnage. I mean, blood everywhere, brain matter on the walls, and they thought, mob hit. It looked like a professional, brutal message from a cartel.
Which led to a critical error.
A huge one. They didn't even test the brothers' hands for gunshot residue.
Which is police work 101, isn't it?
It is. If they had swabbed Lyle's hands that night, this case would have been over in 24 hours. Instead, the brothers were treated as grieving victims. They were interviewed, comforted, and sent on their way. They were free.
And this brings us to the grieving period and the spending spree. Because if you just killed your parents to escape abuse, you might lay low, be in shock. If you killed them for money, well, you might go shopping.
And go shopping they did. This is the greed argument in a nutshell. In the 6 months following the murders, while the police were chasing phantom mobsters, Lyle and Erik spent approximately $700,000.
In 1989 dollars, that's like spending $1.5 or $2 million today. What could two college-age kids possibly buy?
Well, Lyle bought a Porsche Carrera. He bought 3 Rolex watches. And this is my favorite detail of his. He bought a restaurant.
A restaurant. He was what, 21?
Yes. Chuck's Spring Street Cafe in Princeton, New Jersey. He wanted to be a tycoon like his dad. He was playing businessman.
And Erik, what was he spending his share on?
Erik hired a full-time private tennis coach for $50,000 a year. He was flying to Israel and Europe for tournaments. They bought adjoining condos in Marina del Rey. They were living the high life. Trips to the Caribbean, London.
There's a photo you showed me earlier. A basketball card. It's such a bizarre artifact to this case.
Yes. This is a legendary piece of trivia. It's a Mark Jackson NBA trading card from the 1989-1990 season. In the background, courtside at Madison Square Garden, you can clearly see Lyle and Erik Menendez sitting there.
That is chilling. They're sitting there, spending the inheritance, watching the Knicks, while the police are looking for their parents' killers.
It highlights their arrogance. They felt untouchable. But the walls were closing in, and from 2 very different directions. First, technology. Lyle had tried to wipe a file from the family computer.
What was the file?
A new will that José had apparently drafted, which might have disinherited them. Lyle tried to delete it.
Which screams motive.
Right. But the real smoking gun, the thing that blew it all open, came from a place of trust. Erik started seeing a psychologist, Dr. Jerome Oziel.
And he confessed. On tape.
He did. He confessed everything. But here's the twist. Doctor-patient privilege usually protects that. But Dr. Oziel had a mistress, Judalon Smith.
Of course he did. It's a Beverly Hills soap opera.
Oziel told Judalon about the confession, presumably to impress her, or maybe because he was genuinely scared of the brothers. When Oziel and Judalon had a messy breakup, she went to the cops.
A scorned lover.
She blew the case wide open. She told them everything. The police got a warrant for the tapes, and that was it.
So when were they arrested?
Lyle was arrested at the mansion on March 8, 1990. Erik was actually in Israel playing tennis. He flew back to LA and surrendered on March 11.
So they are in custody. The grieving orphan's mask is off. And now we enter the 1990s, the era of the TV trial.
The Tale of Two Trials, and this is where the narrative war really began.
Before we get to the courtroom, though, I want to pause on the defense strategy, because up until the trial, everyone thought greed. How do they pivot to abuse? That came later, right?
It did. That was the masterstroke of Leslie Abramson, Erik's defense attorney. She realized they couldn't deny the killing. The confession tape existed, even if they were fighting its admissibility. So they had to explain why.
And the why was imperfect self-defense. Can you break that down for us non-lawyers?
Sure. Perfect self-defense is, you have a gun pointed at me, I shoot you. Justified, acquittal, imperfect self-defenses. I genuinely believe you are about to kill me, even if that belief is unreasonable or maybe wrong, and I shoot you out of that genuine fear.
So if the jury buys that, it's not murder one.
Correct. It drops the charge to voluntary manslaughter, which carries a much, much lighter sentence. That was the goal. To prove they lived in a state of terror so profound that killing their parents felt like the only way to survive.
Okay, so trial 1, 1993. Court TV is born. The entire nation is glued to the screen.
It was a circus. The defense painted this picture of the House of Horrors. They claimed José was a sadistic pedophile who had molested the boys for years. They claimed Kitty was a broken, drug-addicted enabler who knew and did nothing to stop it.
And the prosecution's response?
The prosecution said this is a complete fabrication. They pointed to the Oziel tapes and said, look, in these tapes, when you first confessed, you never mentioned sexual abuse. You only talked about hating your dad and wanting the money.
So they argued the abuse story was invented for the trial.
Exactly. They argued it was fabricated after they got caught, specifically to fit the legal defense that Abramson had designed.
But the defense did have a witness, right? A cousin.
They did. Diane Vandermolen. She testified that Lyle had told her about sexual abuse back in the 70s when he was a little boy. That was huge for the defense. It was outside corroboration.
But then you had these bizarre, specific claims that were harder to prove.
Right, like the cinnamon story.
Oh, this...
Erik testified that he used to put cinnamon in his father's tea to mask the taste of semen he was forced to ingest. The prosecution brought in taste experts to say, cinnamon is a distinct, powerful flavor. It doesn't mask anything. That's a lie. It became this gritty, granular, and frankly kind of gross debate over the mechanics of abuse.
And in the end, what was the result of that first trial?
Total deadlock. They had two separate juries, one for Lyle, one for Erik. Both juries were hung.
Hung juries, wow.
And it was split right down gender lines, which is fascinating. The women on the juries tended to believe the abuse and voted for manslaughter. The men on the juries saw the shotguns and the spending and voted for murder.
Mistrial, so they have to do it all over again. But the second trial, that was a different ballgame.
Night and day. It starts in 1995. The O.J. Simpson trial had just happened, and the public and the judiciary were frankly sick of celebrity justice circuses.
There's no cameras.
No cameras. And critically, the judge, Judge Weisberg, severely restricted the abuse testimony.
He wouldn't let them talk about it.
Not in the same way. He said, unless you can prove you were in immediate danger at the very moment of the shooting, the long history of abuse is largely irrelevant to the charge of murder. He basically handcuffed the defense. Lyle didn't even testify in the second trial.
So without that whole emotional narrative of the abuse, what was left for the jury to consider?
Just the cold, hard facts. Buying guns, using fake IDs, reloading the shotgun, going to the festival, eating ice cream, the spending spree, the Porsche, the Rolexes.
And that was enough.
It was more than enough. Convicted, both of them. 2 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances, the main one being lying in wait.
And the sentence.
Life in prison without the possibility of parole.
And for almost 30 years, that felt like the end. They went to prison, the world moved on, they exhausted their appeals by 2005. They were just inmates. Case closed.
Until 2023. This is where the story wakes up again, and in a big way.
What happened in 2023? What changed after all that time?
2 crucial pieces of evidence emerged that the defense argued fundamentally changed the game. The first was the Menudo connection.
Menudo, like the boy band from the 80s.
The very same. Roy Rossello, a former member of the band Menudo, went on the Today Show in April 2023. He alleged that when he was 14 years old, he was drugged and raped by José Menendez.
Whoa.
Remember, José was an executive at RCA, their record label.
This is a bombshell. Because the prosecution's whole case in the 90s was José wasn't a monster, the boys made it all up.
Exactly. This corroborates a pattern of predatory behavior. If he did this to a 14-year-old employee, it makes the claims of him doing it to his sons infinitely more plausible. It destroys the fantasy argument from the second trial.
Okay, that's huge. And what was the second piece of evidence?
The Cano letter. This was a letter found by a family member in 2018, but it really hit the legal filings in 2023. It's a letter written by Erik to his cousin, Andy Cano. The key thing is when it was written.
When was that?
1988 months before the murders.
What did it say?
In the letter, Erik explicitly references the abuse happening at that time. He writes about his fear of his father, about what's happening in the house.
So that just kills the prosecution's argument that they made it all up after the arrest.
It's contemporaneous evidence. It proves the state of mind, the fear. It existed long before the crime was committed. So armed with these two new pieces of evidence, the defense filed a habeas corpus petition.
Habeas corpus meaning you have the body basically challenging the legality of their imprisonment.
Yes. They argued that if this new evidence had been heard in the second trial, the verdict would have been different. It would have been manslaughter, not murder. And then you had a major political shift.
George Gascon.
The LA District Attorney, George Gascon, reviewed this in October of 2024. And Gascon was known as a progressive reformer.
Right.
And he looked at the case and said, essentially, I believe them. He cited the dysfunction, the molestation allegations from Rosello. He recommended resentencing. He argued that manslaughter was the appropriate charge all along.
But then, just like in the 90s, the political winds shifted again.
Gascon lost his re-election. The new DA, Nathan Hochman, came in. He was much more of a tough-on-crime prosecutor. He opposed the petition, calling the self-defense claims lies. But the train had already left the station.
The legal process Gascon started was still moving.
It was moving toward a judge. And that brings us to 2025, the year of the roller coaster.
Let's break down the mechanics of what happened last May, because I think this is where a lot of people got confused.
Okay, this is the legal pivot point. In May 2025, a judge officially resentenced Lyle and Erik Menendez. The new sentence was 50 years to life.
Now hold on, they've served about 35 years at this point. If the sentence is 50 years to life, shouldn't they still have 15 years left? Why did everyone think they were getting out immediately?
Because of a specific California law regarding youth offenders. This is where it gets technical, but it's really fascinating.
Okay.
Because they were under 26 years old at the time of the murders. Lyle was 21, Erik was 18. The law now views their brain development differently than it did in 1989.
The idea that a 20-year-old brain isn't fully formed, less impulse control, that kind of thing.
Exactly. So under these new statutes, if you committed a crime under age 26, you are eligible for a parole hearing after serving 25 years, regardless of the nominal sentence length. They had already served 35.
So the resentencing wasn't a get-out-of-jail-free card.
No, it was a become eligible for parole immediately card. The sentence of 50 to life effectively became time served plus eligible for parole.
So the resentencing was the key that unlocked the door. All they had to do was walk through it at the parole hearing.
They had to walk through the parole board. And that is a very, very different room than a courtroom.
Right. The court looks at the crime. Was it murder or manslaughter back in 1989? The parole board looks at the person today. Are you rehabilitated? Are you a risk?
Correct. And that brings us to August 2025. The hype was unbelievable. Social media was counting down the days. Everyone thought this was a formality.
Let's talk about Erik's hearing first. August 21st, 2025. What was his prison record like?
Erik's record, by all accounts, was a model of rehabilitation. He leads meditation groups. He works in the prison hospice with terminally ill inmates. He has painted murals. He is the definition of a rehabilitated prisoner on paper.
So what on earth happened?
He was denied. The board cited ongoing rule violations and concerns about public safety.
That feels incredibly vague. What violations?
It is vague, and that's the thing about parole boards. They have immense discretion. They can look at very small infractions from years ago and say, this shows a lack of respect for authority. Ultimately, they felt he hadn't fully taken responsibility or addressed the root causes of his violence, despite the decades of therapy.
Wow. Okay, so Erik is denied, and then Lyle. The next day, August 22nd.
Lyle was also denied. But for him, the reason was much more concrete. And frankly, it's frustrating for his supporters because it feels so avoidable.
Wes.
Repeated cell phone infractions.
Cell phones. They're in prison because of cell phones.
In prison, a cell phone is major contraband. It's a huge security risk. Lyle has a history of getting caught with them. He uses them to talk to his family, to advocates, to participate in his own defense. But the board looked at that and said, you know the rules. You keep breaking them. If you can't follow the simple rule about a phone inside, how can we possibly trust you to follow the complex laws of society outside?
That is a brutal irony. The court acknowledges the abuse, lowers the sentence, basically says justice has been served, but he stays in prison because he wanted to make phone calls.
It highlights the dual nature of our system. You have to win the legal argument about the past, but you also have to win the behavioral argument about the present. Lyle failed the behavioral test in the eyes of the board.
So, as of today, February 2026, they are back to square one.
Not square one exactly, but they are in a holding pattern. They remain incarcerated. Their next eligible parole hearing is set for 2028.
3 more years of waiting. I want to pivot a bit here to the personal side.
Wow.
Because despite being locked up for 3.5 decades, these guys haven't lived in total isolation. They've had surprisingly full personal lives in a way.
They have. It's one of the stranger aspects of the case. They both got married in prison.
To women on the outside who they met after they were incarcerated.
Yes. Lyle has actually been married twice. He married a pen pal, Anna Erickson, in 1996. They had a ceremony over the telephone.
Telephone wedding.
They divorced in 2001 because she found out he was writing to another woman.
Even in maximum security prison, there's infidelity drama.
Chuckles, exactly. Then in 2003, he married Rebecca Sneed in a prison visiting area. Though it's worth noting, in the lead up to the 2025 hearings, the sources say they separated back in 2024.
And Erik, his marriage seems more stable?
Erik's marriage is fascinating. He married Tammy Sackerman in 1999. They got married in the Folsom prison waiting room.
And I have to ask about the wedding cake. I read this in the notes.
The wedding cake was a Twinkie.
A Tweaky.
You work with what you have. But, jokes aside, Tammy has been incredibly steadfast. She wrote a book about their relationship. They said we'd never make it. She drives 150 miles every single weekend to visit him. They've maintained a relationship for over 25 years without ever being able to live together.
That's dedication.
It speaks to a profound connection, whatever you think of the crime.
It also speaks to the human ability to normalize almost anything. But let's zoom out. The culture has shifted so dramatically around them. In the 90s, they were pariahs, they were monsters. What happened in the last few years to change that?
The Menendez movement, and it was almost entirely driven by Gen Z and TikTok. This is a generation that didn't watch court TV in 1993. They watched the Netflix series Monsters in 2024. They saw short, emotional clips of the abuse testimony on their phones, completely decontextualized from the rest of the trial.
So they saw the victims, not the killers.
Right, and then you had these high-profile figures like Kim Kardashian visiting them in prison, writing essays advocating for their release. The narrative completely flipped from greedy sociopaths to traumatized survivors who snapped.
It's interesting how generational that divide is. My parents still see them as the guys who bought Rolexes with blood money. The younger generation sees them as victims of a justice system that didn't understand trauma or male sexual abuse in the 90s.
That's the core tension of this entire saga. And the parole board denial in August 2025 was a huge splash of cold water on that new movement. It was a reminder that internet popularity and hashtags don't equate to legal freedom. The board doesn't care how many views a TikTok gets.
So what does this all mean? We've looked at the murders, the abuse, the trials, the new evidence, and the parole denial. When you step back and look at this 37-year saga, what is the takeaway for you?
I think it's about the complexity of justice. The legal system is, believe it or not, capable of correcting itself. We saw that with the resentencing. The system acknowledged the abuse context. It effectively said, we got the sentence wrong in the 90s. Life without parole was too harsh given this evidence. That is a victory for the system.
There's a big but.
But it's also a rigid system that demands compliance. The parole denial reminds us that while the cause of a crime matters, the behavior of the individual post-crime matters just as much, if not more, to the people holding the keys. You can't separate the abuse from the murders, but you also can't separate the prisoner from the prison rules. It's all one messy, complicated package.
It's just tragic all around. A family was destroyed in 1989. 2 parents dead in a horrific, brutal way. 2 sons whose lives effectively stopped at age 18 and 21. And now 2 men in their late 50s still waiting for a door to open that they thought was already unlocked.
And we will all be watching again in 2028 to see if it finally does.
Before we go, I want to leave our listeners with a final question. It's something I've been wrestling with while prepping this deep dive.
Go for it.
Can a narrative ever truly be rewritten? We have the Menudo testimony now. We have the Cano letter. We understand the context of the abuse in a way the jury in 1996 did not. But we also have the unchangeable brutality of the act. The shotguns, the reloading, the final shot to Kitty's face. Are some crimes simply too brutal to ever fully forgive, regardless of the cause? Is there a line between an explanation and an excuse that we are still, as a society, afraid to draw?
That is the ultimate question here. At what point does the reason for the violence stop justifying the violence itself? I don't think we have a clear answer for that yet, and the Menendez case is ground zero for that debate.
Something to think about. That's it for this week's Deep Dive. We'll be watching closely as 2028 approaches. Until then, stay curious.
And stay critical.
See you next time.